The following presentation is part of the Beyond the Blast Doors network.
How you doing?
Good. I'm excited. This is nice. I'm glad we finally got this worked out.
I'm glad we are too. And you know, it's funny. I've been familiar with a lot of your work without realizing I was familiar with a lot of your work. And then I think we kind of crossed paths somewhere on Twitter because you were wearing a Shriv shirt or something, which came from.
Yeah, I feel like we both have like a very similar story about each other because I wasn't familiar with the podcast, so I saw the shirt and did some digging. And it was like, okay.
There it is. It's all coming together. Well, it's great. So maybe that might be great to let other people know who you are.
Sure.
So Mitch, maybe do a quick intro of yourself.
Cool. Yeah. Hi, my name is Mitch Dyer. I'm a writer. I worked on Star Wars Battlefront 2, working on the campaign, and Star Wars Squadrons, which I presume is why I'm here.
Yeah, it's one of the reasons. It's also because you probably have some really cool stories about working on all that stuff and getting there. And so let me kind of start. We will definitely dig into Battlefront 2 and Squadrons and those sort of things. But maybe let's just start by getting to know. You know, you're a writer, and what does that mean as a video game writer? I mean, you started at IGN, I think, right, and reviewing games, but then you went into actually creating content. How does that sort of journey work?
It's funny because I feel like everybody in game development, whether they're a writer or a designer or whatever, excuse me, they all have very different stories. Like nobody comes in like, oh, I did what you're supposed to do and now I'm here. Nobody. So yeah, like I came from media. I spent years and years working on like writing about games, doing previews and interviews and reviews and news and all that kind of stuff, right? Covering the games industry. And that helped me meet a lot of wonderful people who are very creative and eventually gave me an opportunity to kind of jump the fence and start writing games myself. That came about mostly by chance, entirely because somebody I knew who liked me a lot thought that I might be a good fit for a good job working on Star Wars. But I didn't have any like writing samples because I hadn't written in a while, right? Like I used to write fiction quite a bit. It was something I loved to do. It was like the only thing I was ever good at was my English class. But I fell off it, right? Because I'm spending all this time playing games and writing about games and like that. When that's your profession, like that's the majority of your writing, and there's not much energy and time for much else. But when someone says, "Hey, do you want to write Star Wars?" You find some and you write a good sample for them. So I wrote a sample for the Star Wars job that was like a 28-page TV pilot. I like way overcommitted and overdid it.
Wow.
Just like, hey, here's an idea for what a TV show might be. I can write Star Wars.
Like, dude, we're talking about a video game. We don't need a TV show.
Yeah, and in hindsight too, it's very funny because they're very different. Like you write them very differently. The way they're made is everything about them is different.
That's great. So you ended up, and what was the first Star Wars gig you had?
Yeah, it was Battlefront 2. Yeah, writing on Star Wars was Battlefront 2. I'd done my best in my time at IGN to like write about Star Wars as often as I could, just because I loved it. Right?
Yeah.
I mean, like everybody has like game development. Nobody has the same story. Star Wars, everyone has the same story, which is I saw it and it changed my life.
Right.
Which is great. But I came aboard at Motive Studios in Montreal and started working on the campaign for Battlefront 2.
Great. So let's talk a little bit about your Star Wars story. So what are some of your earliest memories of Star Wars? How were you introduced to the franchise and the saga?
It was through my dad. My dad was a huge Star Wars fan, right? Like he saw it in theaters and he grew up with it, and like that was his favorite thing. And my dad's a big movie buff, and he loves to go to movies and take the family to the movies. So when they re-released the trilogy in the 90s, when they were doing the special editions and they put New Hope, Empire, and Jedi back in theaters, he was like, "Hey, we're gonna go see these movies in theaters because it's awesome."
That's the way to go. Yeah.
Yeah. So he took us to see all that. We watched, I think they came out like annually or like every 6 months. It was like a weird cadence, but he had old VHSs. So I was like, yep, more, watch it all the time. He was also, my dad had like a big Thrawn collection of books and like all the like, new stuff. Yeah. He like, cause at the time, right? Like in the 90s, there wasn't extra Star, like it ended at Jedi and that was it.
Sure. Yeah.
Right?
I mean,
So-
you had all that expanded universe stuff. It's interesting that everybody, so I was, I was in my 20s in the 90s. And so like I was so hungry for whatever I could find. So it's interesting that he, Thrawn was the character, I guess, of the big, well, that's not entirely true. I mean, there were other characters, but it's interesting that he had a Thrawn, I don't want to say obsession because I don't know, but it sounds like he was into it.
I think it was more just, hey, there's these books, right? And they're set after the movies, and there's these new characters, and there's Han and Luke and Leia, and they're doing stuff. I'm going to check that out.
Yeah.
And the Thrawn's obviously just like a fascinating character who really carved out this like corner of the Star Wars universe for himself in a really nice way.
Yeah.
Tim Zahn did like an amazing job with those books. So I think that as like an EU onboarding experience, they're pretty good ones for any casual Star Wars fan, especially if you're, it's the early 90s, you're still enthusiastic about it as an adult, like you were when you were a kid. Like it's perfect. Like it's just stars align, right? Mm-hmm. So they're in my house, right? My dad's showing me Star Wars, and he's like, also I have these books. Yay, more.
Oh, that's awesome. So and so it influenced you. Did it influence you to want to be a writer, or was it, or those two tracks that kind of just happened on their own?
It's one of those things, like in hindsight, I think it did, but I don't know that I actually recognized it at the time because I didn't have the words for it or really consider like, you can be a writer and that's a job.
Right.
But I think for me, it was such a window into storytelling that I'd never seen. And I feel like that's sort of the Star Wars experience. Is the lens of these movies is we're telling a classic story in a crazy new way, like completely different than anybody has expected, with personable characters and a universe it feels lived in and genuine, like you could be there and touch it, and all of it just stood out as a place that captured the imagination and made me want to tell stories. And I, as a kid, I had toys and I was like, tell my own stories, like everything, right? Like idealistic Star Wars childhood.
Yeah, it's funny too because I think once you, I had this sort of revelation lately and talked about it with a couple of guests, sort of, and it's this trying to figure out what that toy obsession is, right? I mean, Star Wars and toys go together. I mean, and never mind the business aspect. Well, you can't say never mind the business aspect because that's a huge part of it. But it's this desire to kind of be a part of it. Something about Star Wars makes you want to be a part of it, right? You can be a James Bond fan, but you don't have James Bond action figures. You can, there's something about this story that you want to. Oh, I mean, look behind me. I mean, you want to have. You want to own pieces of it, and I think that drives you into it a little bit even more.
Yeah, I think there's also something to like, I want to be doing something with it. Like I want to engage with the fiction in some way while I'm not watching the film, or imagine what other stories might have been or what happens between the scenes and that kind of stuff. And I feel like, for imaginative kids, that fills the void of more Star Wars, and still does today, obviously, right? But you're right, there is the sentiment towards Star Wars toys is like, some people collect and some people play, but there's something about it, like every year, right? That Force Friday rolls around and I'm like, I'm a 32-year-old man. I don't really care. But then they show the stuff, and I'm like, what I do need is another new Stormtrooper that's a little bit different because he looks really good.
This one has a red stripe.
Yeah, he's got the Rogue One breathing hole on the side of his mask.
It's true, and it definitely pulls you in. So, did you Star Wars video games? I think some of the early. So my earliest memories, and ironically, as Squadrons begins to take off and has really, I'm so excited that Squadrons. I'm not saying this because you're on the show, but Squadrons actually is one of those games that lives up to what you want it to be. But it's because
that's so awesome. I'm so happy to hear that.
Oh, awesome, cool, and I think it's because I'm a 50-year-old man, and I grew up playing X-Wing versus TIE Fighter and the X-Wing series, and those three computers. I mean, I lost, of course, days of my life in front of that thing. What are were you an N64 Star Wars player? What was your sort of video game history with?
I would kind of just, because I was obsessed with games as a kid, right?
Yeah.
So I was like, oh, there is a Star Wars game? Oh, there's a lot of them? More, please. So I dabbled in as many as I could, and it started with Super Star Wars because we had a Super Nintendo. Mm-hmm. And chronologically, that came first. But growing up, a lot of my friends had PCs, and I didn't have PC gaming in my life probably till high school, right? Like I bought my own computer to play PC games because our home computer couldn't do it. But all my friends had it, so I was playing like Dark Forces and Jedi Knight and like all the mods in Jedi Knight multiplayer to make it look like whatever Dragon Ball Z, but it's Jedi Knight, like madness. So I was exposed to a lot of it, but the ones that stood out for me most were probably Rogue Squadron on the N64. And part of the allure was I didn't have it.
Okay.
But then the other part of the allure is like, oh my god, it's like space battles and ground battles and X-wings and third person, first person. It's like all the pilot stuff.
Yep.
The original Battlefront was instrumental in me wanting to, like, I don't know. It was such a fascinating game to me, and it was.
Yeah.
In hindsight, it's just Battlefield, right? It's just Battlefield reskinned to Star Wars, and they added some new stuff and made it its own flavor, and in its own right, it held its own against Battlefield. It was an awesome game.
Yeah. And so, why can't I remember the name? What was the the multiplayer? Galaxies. Yes.
The MMO.
Did you play much of that? I played, like, I couldn't get into that as much as I thought I would. I think,
because there were two, right? There was Galaxies back in the day, and then now there's the Old Republic.
Correct.
Galaxies I couldn't get into, probably, I think it was like PC gaming time. Like, I didn't have a machine.
Right.
And by the time I did, it was maybe like on its way out.
Yeah.
But that game was super hardcore, right? Like, it required a lot of time and a lot of work, and you had to, like, get a job and do that job.
Right.
It's intense. But, if you're role playing and you want to be a moisture farmer or whatever, like, that's amazing.
Yeah.
I played a bit of the Old Republic when it came out. I say a bit, I played like 100 hours. It's an MMO, which is like a drop in the bucket of, like, the ocean that is the time it takes to play those kinds of games.
Yeah.
But I like that a lot because it brought the kind of BioWare storytelling of Knights of the Old Republic, which is another, it's amazing.
Classic, yeah.
Yeah, and a game that really cared about story and put story first, because so that's what Star Wars does best, right?
Yep.
They just happen to make an amazing RPG around it.
Yeah, so it's Knights of the Old Republic, of course, is that's one that I'm waiting for some sort of revisit to.
Me too.
Or something.
I would love it. And I remember there were rumors like 2 years ago.
Yeah,
they were like, it's happening. I don't know.
Yeah.
Please, yet, like, I don't know about this. Like, I don't know. I work at this company, but I don't know how licensing works. I have no idea. I would love it. I played it on iPad a couple of years ago at Christmas.
Yeah.
Just like, hey, Dad, check it out. It's on iPad.
Yep.
Amazing. Holds up completely.
That's I mean, and I think it's because it's story driven, and I think that's what works. So let's talk a little bit about Battlefront 2, because that's so. What role did you play there? You worked on the campaign side.
So I was one of two writers on the campaign. It was me and a guy named Walt Williams, who worked at 2K for a long time. We worked on games like Spec Ops: The Line, The Darkness, Mafia, stuff like that. But Spec Ops was like, that was his award-winning game. That game came out in 2012. I reviewed it at IGN, and it's a very kind of cerebral story game. And we get the game early because we're very fortuitous to be able to have access to games early in the media. And I played through it, and my brain exploded because it's brilliant. And I had to talk to somebody about it. And Walt happened to be coming in the office that day for an interview for some other reason. And I was like, that meeting right now. I need to talk to you. And we were friends ever since.
Oh, that's great. And so did I understand you right? Your first video game writing job was for Battlefront 2.
Yeah, my first creative professional job was, do you want to write at one of the biggest publishers on the planet for the biggest IP on the planet for one of the biggest games on the planet? Like, yes. Like, that doesn't happen to people.
So I think what I always find interesting, because I have experience as a journalist with Star Wars Galaxy magazine, and I've written some fiction, but you alluded to it before. What's the process for writing for a video game, whether it's the campaign mode in Squadrons or Battlefront 2? How is that put together? Is it? I always imagine you guys have like a giant binder that's like a choose your own adventure game, and that's a book, and that's what you do. But how does it all kind of come together? What's the process?
It's kind of like that. Like, the game design document is kind of your choose your own adventure book, but it's just links in a big complicated wiki. Assuming people are keeping it up to date, but it's such a complex machine to make a game, and to like suddenly add story to it is like, okay, now you need a narrative wrapper for everything. Writing a game and writing Star Wars Battlefront 2 are very different things. Because writing Battlefront 2 is unlike writing Squadrons. There are two completely different writing storytelling experiences, and part of it is they're different games, right? And the nature of the game you're making is going to reflect the story you're telling. Because if you have a game that's about shooting people, like the core gameplay is shooting people, and the story is not about that, that doesn't really track, right?
Right.
So from Battlefront 2, we were spinning up the studio at the same time we were spinning up the team and the game. They were all new. So story, not really beholden to a lot of the kind of limitations of starting up a studio and getting teams onboarded for like technical and engineering and the things you need to build games. It takes time, right? Story, you can just get going. Ideas, paper, go. It gets more complicated from there, but as a starting point, you can get going. So we had an outline really early. We had a really, really strong outline really early for Battlefront 2. We knew what we wanted to do. We knew the story we wanted to tell.
And were you tying it to, you were working closely with the story group or not?
Oh yeah, my first meeting at EA was number one on day one was go to EA, see the future of Star Wars. Here's what we're doing. Here's where your game fits in. Day two is go to Lucasfilm and pitch them our story.
Wow.
Which we'd been doing for however many days before that.
Right.
But we went to Lucasfilm with a story concept and pitched them, hey, this is Battlefront 2. Here's what we're thinking. Early days, lots of loose ideas, right? It's not, it's the bones. And most of it actually shipped. Most of what was in that original document is what the game was, which is surprising and I think uncommon. But, we lost some stuff just for time, or it didn't work, or we wanted to do a different direction or whatever. But then you just add more because the game gets more interesting over time and you discover what's fun while making a game, or you work with story team and they get excited about this character. So you double down on them in a way that you hadn't thought about before.
That's wild. And so how did you, I have just so many questions about Battlefront 2. I could because I
do this all day, man. I know.
But let me just kind of start with, so how did you, where do the characters come from, the main characters? Obviously you probably, the environment, the time frame. Did you have to pitch the time frame as well, or did they say we want Battlefront 2 to take place starting after the battle?
No, Lucasfilm was very accommodating in terms of, because we kind of thought going in, we don't really know what it's like to make Star Wars, and the story team is there. They're protective of Star Wars. They're the ones who make it all make sense. Maybe they're going to be kind of hard to work. It's amazing. Working with story team was the highlight of making Star Wars for me, because they were not just accommodating in terms of, hey, we want to support you and make sure your game fits into Star Wars. They're creative people, right? They're filmmakers. They're all storytellers. So they all have amazing ideas and amazing feedback for story and characters to make them better. So when it came to our cast of characters, we knew what we wanted to do with the story, which is we want to have Imperial Special Forces, right? Because I like the idea. I like Republic Commando a lot as well. We're just going to keep hitting on all the games. Yeah, that I like.
That was the one I was forgetting. I was seeing the box in my head, but I couldn't.
So I liked that game, and I was like, a strike force or a special forces team or something would be cool, right? Like Imperial operators would be cool. But then thematically, we were thinking, okay, well, what about a light side person born into dark side circumstance? And what is the breaking point of a loyalist? Right. Those were kind of the pillars for the story. In addition to, we wanted to make it a pilot story, a soldier story, and have iconic Star Wars heroes, obviously, because it's a Battlefront game. You got to have them. Yep. So those were our North Stars. That's like a constellation of North Stars. But those were the targets, right? Those were what we knew we wanted to do, and we came to the table day one with a lot of that with Lucasfilm, and it took a lot of finessing and improving because your first idea is never your best idea. But yeah, we started we knew we wanted to have Iden as a commander. I think that was her original name too, was Iden, Captain Iden. We knew we wanted her to have a loyal ally. We knew we wanted her to have somebody who betrayed her, and in turn who she betrayed, or he feels that she has betrayed him. And we also knew that because they were going to eventually join the Alliance, that we needed a cool Alliance character, and we wanted to have an alien. And that's how Shriv came about. My camera's getting blurry. I'm sorry.
Yeah, that's all right. So was Shriv in his form early on, or he was just a rebel pilot?
Shriv was just an alien. We knew we wanted he's the rebel alien. His name is Shriv. That was it was his first name that Walt came up with. Shriv. It's just perfect. We knew Shriv was going to be an alien who. I think conceptually originally it was he's Leia's eyes and ears inside of Inferno Squad when they join the rebellion, because Leia's going to want someone inside to make sure they're on the up and up and just keep an eye. We trust them. They've done good. They seem legit. But just in case, Shriv, we'll send them a cynic and a misanthrope, and he'll keep us informed. Yeah. So he was a little bit of resistance for Iden, but also a little bit obviously comedy foil for her and Del.
Yeah. Yeah, and so what about bringing Lando in? Was he sort of always on your list of people you needed, you wanted to write for, or?
Yeah, always. So I think Walt has told this story in an interview, so I feel okay sharing it. Otherwise they'd be like, oh, I don't know if we can talk about it. Originally, we weren't going to ship with Lando, right? The original plan wasn't that Lando was going to be a hero in Battlefront 2 at launch. Because they were looking at, it's multiple studios making up enormous games, single player, multiplayer, Starfighter, tons of stuff, right? Lots of moving pieces from day one. So you never really know, maybe it's going to shift or maybe they'll change plans. So Lando wasn't in the plan. He wasn't there day one. But we were like, okay, listen, this game obviously has to have hero missions. Those hero missions need to tie into Iden's story. Those heroes need to be recognizable. Lando's amazing. Lando is the perfect partner for Shriv. There's no way, like, you could pair him with Han Solo or Leia, and I'm sure there's great stories to be told there. We've thought about them a lot. But Lando's Lando, man.
Yeah.
Lando's Lando. And if you write for Lando, there's a chance you get to cast Billy D. Williams.
I feel like anybody who's worked anything related to Star Wars is like, we got to get Billy D. Williams as a part of this. Whether it's it was so cool to hear him on Rebels and to hear him bring, and he's one of those, and because I obviously you didn't have Harrison Ford voice Han and all those things, but like, it has to be Billy D. Williams, like, because he brings the heart and soul of that character there, and
that's it.
And even in his aged version, even in The Rise of Skywalker, just to have him on screen, it changes the film and it brings you right back to that.
Totally.
So great. So you wrote all that. So how did you respond to, and what kind of limitations did you have? Because I think the only complaint people had, other than loot boxes, which I know wasn't your fault because you were in story. We can not even say that phrase again.
On that sword, it was completely my fault.
It was, okay. Yeah.
It was me. It was my decision. Right, me with all my power. Idiot.
Right. The story guy was like, you know what? We should try this concept of loot boxes.
Got an idea.
But so the only complaint I think people had was that the campaign was a little short. Was were you sort of like limited? Was there a limit to it, or
a little bit, right? I mean, every game is going to have compromises. Every game is going to have the deadline, right?
Right.
We also had the least flexible deadline in video game history because we had to come out alongside the film, right? It's the whole point. Is people are excited about Star Wars. Get them in to play the game. They get excited. They immerse themselves. They get excited. Boom, the movie comes out. Boom, movie content comes to the game. It's the perfect circle.
Right.
So we definitely had a deadline.
Yep.
That was just ever present. And even when you're years out, you're like, oh man, that's only 2 years.
Right.
But we also, early on, narratively, we probably bit off a little more than we could chew just because we were excited.
Right.
We came up with a lot of mission concepts that didn't ship. Some of them got further along. Some of them were just ideas. But yeah, we had thought out a bigger story. And I people talk about it, Iden's defection as kind of the contentious point. And some people just don't like it because they want it to be evil.
But I blame, sorry to interrupt you, but
no, it's fine.
I blame the marketing for that, because I think people fully, and I'm sure as the writer, you're like, yeah, blame marketing. Perfect. But because I think people had this sense, it was marketed as play as an Imperial. And so I think people put it in their head, I'm going to wear, an Imperial uniform and play the game as an Imperial. But I actually thought that's the heart and soul of Star Wars. And I think you even referenced it a little bit up front there. The heart and soul of Star Wars is recognizing what good is and deciding if you're going to do something about it. That's it.
And that's why, I take those criticisms of that moment in the story when Iden changes her mind, because I can deal with it because I understand where it comes from. And I think the criticisms are 100% valid. I just don't agree, right? I think that if the story is you play as an Imperial and they stay an Imperial, that's not super interesting to me, right? There's not a lot of change there. And there's obviously room for Imperial stories, but in the kind of game we were making and the kind of story we wanted to tell, it just fit. It fit to have somebody who, and it's not, her defection is interesting, I think, because it's not just, oh no, I'm out. It's, we're going to save these people, right? Iden's betrayal on Vardos is we're going to save people's lives. We're going to save Imperial innocent lives. And and they leave. They defect. They don't defect right away. They go into like a nebula, and they're like, "Oh my god, what are we gonna do? We have no idea." We send a distress call. Maybe they can help these people. We'll probably get arrested. That sucks, but we're gonna do it because it's what we should do.
Yeah.
So I like that. I like that element of Iden's story because it gives us a view of what a breaking point for an Imperial loyalist is and what good they're actually capable of in the aftermath of it.
Yeah. Yeah, and was it always a father-daughter relationship with her and
I think we talked about her mother at some point.
Okay.
And then I can't remember. Like so much changes over time.
Yeah.
But I remember we at a certain point we were like, okay, her father's this Imperial Navy admiral.
Yeah.
That relationship is interesting, right? Maybe she's like an army brat growing up on Star Destroyers, and they have a contentious relationship. Because he's got a legacy, and what's her legacy going to be? Like we talked about so many ideas and how it relates to these characters. And then her mom ended up being a character who got a little more depth in the novel, where she was an Imperial propaganda artist, and she was responsible for like a lot of the stuff you see on Vardos and bringing the personality of that to life through the Empire.
Right. Yeah, it's I found that to be a really interesting, and you couldn't have gotten better actors. I think everybody, Del and Iden and everybody was fantastic. And of course, I have a real soft spot in my heart for Shriv, if for no other reason, because I was a fan of his, and then I spoke to Dan Donahue, who was just
he's a gift, right?
He was amazing, and it's one of the, I'm always hesitant to people ask me like, who's your favorite interview, and he just was so he was just funny. Like he was just,
and he was so
guy.
Engaged, and he was excited, and he was eager to talk to you, and he had lots of great stories and anecdotes, Star Wars and otherwise. Yeah,
and he's but it was great to. It's funny because he brought that character, and then I didn't even realize he was in Skyrim, which I played, and then realized, oh, he's in that as well. But
he shows up in the funniest places. Did you ever play the second Wolfenstein game?
Yes, yeah, I didn't know he was in that as well.
I didn't either. I got to that scene and was like, "Oh my god, that's Dan! You've got to be." And he's a gift. He shows up in the strangest places, and I love it.
Yeah, and he's got a great personality, and he's just great
totally
in many ways. And I was hoping we were going to get him a spot in Rise of Skywalker, just showing up somewhere. But
we heard. Do you remember ahead of the movie? I don't know if you were like reading leaks and stuff.
Oh my god, I spent way too much time on that stuff.
Oh my god, I was like, tell me everything. And like, obviously, 99% of it is going to be lies, but I love it. I live for it in like that era of like new Star Wars film. I'm like, all of it. So there were rumors that there was like, in the Resistance base, there's a blue alien, big head, red eyes, set photos, or no photos, sorry, but it was like somebody on sets talking about an alien and scene.
Yeah.
And speculation is like, oh my god, it's Shriv.
Yeah.
And we were like, no. And Walt and I were like, we dare not get our hopes up. We're like texting people at Lucasfilm, like, do you know anything? And they're like, I don't actually know what that's about. Also, I'm not talking to you about this movie that's not out yet.
I mean, it was cool that he showed up in Alphabet Squadron.
Yeah,
which was very
and
cool.
The Rebecca Ronor's novel, Resistance Reborn, as well.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, is he in Alphabet Squadron? I'm not sure, but he's definitely in Resistance Reborn. That's the one I was thinking.
Yeah, and we were surprised because we knew, talking to Del Rey, they were like, "Hey, good news! Like, we're gonna do more Zay and Shriv." And we were like, "Yay, Zay and Shriv! We miss them. We're glad they're gonna have adventures and they're like survive. That's nice." And it's also a nice thing to like, because we absorbed some of the story content from like Shattered Empire and Aftermath, and we took some of those batons and ran in a different direction, or a continuation of some of those threads. Yeah. So now it was like the opposite. We're like, oh, they're taking our characters now and doing new things with it. So that was exciting. So I opened Resistance Reborn, and I know Shriv and Zay are in it, but I don't realize like they're a third of the book.
Yeah.
It's so good. Such a delight.
That's got to be wild as a storyteller to see your. I mean, you just said it's interesting to pick up somebody else's, but to be able to see, when Lucas. I mean, I was just 2 weeks ago, I had Kevin J. Anderson on the show, who was, of course, he wrote all the EU stuff, and he was talking about seeing EU concepts sort of being reborn, and for you to see a character that you gave birth to have that kind of a role, and it must be pretty wild.
It's cool. It's because it's nice, not only because like Shriv showed up in a couple comics as well, like the Star Wars Adventure comics.
Yeah. So
we're like, oh, nice, like him and 9 Number having an adventure. Like, that's a cool idea.
Yeah.
So it's cool now to see like, oh, like what are they gonna do with him? Because we don't know anymore. Because we're not.
That's right.
We're not making Star Wars, so we don't. It's nice. It's like he just belongs to Star Wars now, and other writers can choose to pick up that thread, and maybe Shriv's a great character for a story here. That's cool. I love that element of Star Wars. I love it. And it's you when you're making Star Wars, you think about that stuff a lot, where you're looking at, okay, what's the new stuff, right? In the last 5 years, there's obviously been a lot of new stuff as they rebuild what this universe is between the films. So now you have this rich, enormous library of new Star Wars characters and new Star Wars stories to draw from and learn from, and it just makes for better stories and a more cohesive, connected universe that feels natural.
Yep, without a doubt. And speaking of new Star Wars stories, how do you like that for a segue? Let's talk a little bit about Squadrons, which is out about a month now.